Okay, so this video isn't necessarily a review on Infinity War per se. In fact, I'm not really sure what to call this, so let's just call this a thought piece, I guess. I'll probably call this video Thoughts on Infinity War or something along those lines. I don't intend for this to be very long, but I wanted to express my view on Infinity War after seeing it recently. If you're new to the channel and have just stumbled across this, then, well, I'm sorry you ended up here of all places. And second, I should probably clarify that I'm not exactly what you'd call seasoned when it comes to film critique. I'm more of a hardcore gamer myself. So if you're looking for a more experienced person, I'd recommend checking out either Ralph the Movie Maker's or YMS's video on the film instead. I can't believe I'm 4 videos in and I'm already sucking off bigger YouTubers. But if you're still up for watching, let me just warn you by saying that there will be spoilers for Infinity War in this video. I originally planned to have a section meant for spoilers, but in all honesty I prefer to just express my thoughts on the film as a whole, instead of dancing around spoilers for as long as possible. So if you don't want to get spoiled, then this video really isn't for you. Like I said, I'm not intending for this to be a review. I suppose it should also go without saying that I don't have much footage of the film to provide in this video, seeing as how it's a brand new release and all. All I really have is trailer footage, so apologies in advance for the lack of relevant clips to complement my audio. Avengers Infinite Warfare is a movie unlike anything I've really seen before. I don't mean that in the sense that the film is so amazing that it trumps anything I've ever seen. I mean that more in the idea of its premise. Never before have I seen a film like this where it's the culmination of many other movies that have come before it. All these films about individual superheroes all building up to this one huge event. Before going into it, I had a couple of doubts. First off, with a film so jam-packed full of superheroes, how could Marvel possibly give enough screen time to everyone? I figured there'd be problems where some heroes were completely forgotten about in favour of others, but in the film, while of course the main heroes had the most screen time, I felt that everyone, minor characters included, had their moment. Even people who are fans of Mantis or Rhodes could get something out of this, although I'm not sure why you'd be a fan of Rhodes. My other big concern is the one that encompasses pretty much every Marvel film up to this point, and that's the lack of any sense of consequence, any sense of stakes. You know in The Winter Soldier that Captain America is going to win the day, the same with Iron Man in his films, and I felt that stakes and consequence was an absolute must for this film. You just can't have an event on a scale like this and have nothing to keep you concerned for the people on screen. Even with this in mind, I was pleasantly surprised by Infinity War in this regard. Thanos feels like an intimidating villain, and he grows not only in character but in power throughout the course of the film. Admittedly, I didn't know much about Thanos before this. I've heard just how powerful he is in the comics, but I've never really read any of those. I was just sort of under the impression he was a big purple boy who wanted to do bad things to the universe because he wanted to. But instead what I saw was a villain who had much more to him than that. Sure, he might enjoy killing a bit too much, but his whole objective doesn't come without reason. He has a clear and understandable motivation for what he's setting out to do, and despite my initial assumptions of his character, he certainly has a level of humanity about him that only goes to make him that much more likeable, even as the villain. Seeing all these characters come together in one big movie certainly makes for some great action scenes where you get to see them all cooperate and combine their abilities in creative ways that kept me invested. It was great to see my two favourites, Star-Lord and Doctor Strange, work off each other directly in one scene in particular. I also really enjoyed the structure they went for with this too. Instead of having everyone in one place, they decided to group the heroes and scatter them, having each of them take part in the war from different perspectives, which is a great idea in my mind because it allows for each character to have some narrative breathing room without everyone overlapping in one big mess. It was nice to see a Marvel film take a slightly darker tone as opposed to the ones that came before it. There's a sense of hopelessness and struggle that only further adds to my point about stakes earlier. Loki gets killed pretty much right off the bat in front of Thor, and Loki is far from the only death. That's not to say the whole movie is all doom and gloom though. In typical Marvel fashion, you still have the light-hearted and funny moments that for the most part worked. Drax being the highlight for me as he was in the Guardians movies too. It felt like a nice mix to keep the whole thing from feeling miserable. I was never really big on Gamora, but here she was given a good bit of screen time for me to understand and appreciate her as a character a bit more, as well as her relationship with Thanos. The scene where Thanos has to sacrifice her to get the Soul Stone is quite predictable from the moment it's established you need to trade a soul to get the stone, but ultimately it didn't detract from the scene as a whole. Seeing Thanos feel upset and hesitant at the idea of having to sacrifice his daughter to continue his mission was great, and acts as an impactful turning point where Thanos really has to commit to his plan. And the fact that he doesn't just kill Gamora straight away shows his connection to her without just explaining it away in a line of dialogue. Killing off some of the characters that I've come to like over the course of the previous movies makes fights and standoffs during Infinity War actually mean something to me. There was one scene in particular where Peter Quill is trying to stop Thanos from taking Gamora that I found to be pretty tense. You know Thanos could very easily kill Star-Lord, and given that he has I think 3 of the Infinity Stones at this point, the threat of Quill being killed right then and there feels very possible. Luckily Thanos just turns his gun into a bubble blower and then fucks off, but still. On the subject of the Infinity Stones, it's amazing to see what the stones can do when in the wrong hands. Or the right hands, I suppose, depending on your perspective, with each stone giving Thanos a new ridiculous buff. I mean, at one point he literally brings a fucking moon down on Iron Man's head. Marvel's huge budget obviously goes a long way to capturing moments like these. Although one of Thanos' henchmen looked a bit off to me. In the part taking place in Wakanda, there's a woman alien person who just looked a little bit too cartoony for me, which kinda took me out of it. Apart from that, I didn't really notice much else that bothered me really. I think overall, the biggest and best surprise of the whole film was the fact that Thanos actually wins in the end. I mean, sure, it was a possibility, but I didn't quite expect the whole thing to end the way it did. If you haven't seen the film and you're watching this for some reason, basically Thanos gets all the Infinity Stones, does a click, and half the universe's population turns to dust, heroes included. So at this point, pretty much half the cast is dead now. Not even just side characters either. Spider-Man, Quill, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, and many more all just dissolve. It all ends with Thanos doing exactly what he set out to do. The sudden realisation on a lot of the characters' faces having known they failed makes for some pretty impactful scenes. Spider-Man's death in particular is one that stood out to me. He spends most of the movie as a very confident and quirky kid, only to show just how scared he is of dying when the realism of the whole situation kicks in, begging Tony Stark for help when in reality there's nothing that can be done. One question I can't quite get out of my head though is this. So, Thanos clicks his fingers with the Infinity Gauntlet and half the world's population die, so does that mean there was a possibility of it killing him too? Not necessarily a problem with the film, just an idea I couldn't help consider when the movie was over. As much as I like the break from the happy good guys win, bad guys lose ending, I'm slightly concerned about the future of the whole Marvel universe, namely the sequel to Infinity War in particular, because I highly doubt Marvel will leave half the cast dead and just continue from there. I think it's pretty obvious that some people will come back, but the question is, how many? If the sequel involves bringing absolutely everyone back from the dead, then the events of this movie will cease to mean anything, and any sense of consequence or meaning behind the character deaths will be completely removed as a result, so some will need to stay dead. Not to mention that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is apparently a thing in 2020, and I highly doubt it will just be Rocket on his own, with all the other Guardians gone. Not sure that'll go down very well. Might be interesting for a movie though, who knows. I personally think that everyone who was killed by the Infinity Gauntlet at the end will come back, with anyone that was killed by more conventional methods staying dead. So Gamora, Vision and Loki should ideally stay dead in my mind for there to be any consequence for the events during the course of Infinity War. I guess only time will tell what happens really. I feel that this film would have had such a greater meaning if this truly was the end of the Marvel Universe, but Disney will no doubt keep these films going until they've made every penny in the world off them. And that idea on its own is troubling, because I'm not quite sure where you can really go from here. How could you possibly step up the stakes beyond galaxy-wide genocide? All in all, I quite enjoyed Infinity War. It was a nice change of direction from the usual affair, but as I said, I'm curious to see where it goes from here. I just hope the sequel doesn't spoil everything that's taken place here. That's pretty much it for my thoughts, so thanks for watching if you got this far. I should probably add that I won't be doing this sort of thing on movies very often. I just wanted to cover this in particular as it's something of a special case I guess. Who knows though, maybe I'll do something like this again.